To the last in the New South reading series for the 2011-2012 academic year. I'm going to keep my time up here short because I want to focus on the readers, but I do have a few quick announcements that I will make. We do have issues of New South here tonight, up here at the front table. They're free with the blue cover. We also have Emily Schulten's book, which is right next door. It's $12.95, so you can talk to Emily if you would like to purchase one. Dressed in black font? Yeah. For news on New South, we don't have a lot of news right now, but you can keep up at www.review.gsu.edu, but not for long. We're going to switch our website over this summer to something else. But we'll put on there where the new website is. You can friend us on Facebook, and you can also follow us on Twitter at New South GSU. I don't tweet that much stuff, but I might figure it out at some point. And you can, of course, visit workshop.gsu.edu for information on all of GSU's upcoming readings, of which I'm sure we will be putting many fantastic ones on the calendar for next year. So I do want to thank a few people. First of all, my entire staff for a job well done this year. So let's have a big round of applause. And also to the fine people at Kavarna for hosting our readings this year. Very good. And also to Jim Woglum, who I don't think, him and Jenny were running late, I guess, but he did our awesome poster. And he also did the cover of the latest New South and the last poster, so he's kind of cover artist right now, so thank you to him. So I'm going to give it over to Josh Russell, the co-director of the creative writing program, who's going to make a few quick remarks before we start introducing our readers. So give it up for Josh.
I'll be very, very quick. In fact, what I want to say is that I hope this becomes an annual event and that we can see graduates up here reading, because I think one of the things that makes GSU's creative writing program really strong is the community of writers. However, that community, I think, exists in some secret places often, and I'd like to shed some light on those nice little secret communities. That sounds kind of sinister. In a less sinister way, I really want to congratulate this semester's graduates. It's a good crop, and we're going to see them back soon when we have them back to do their alumni readings, I'm sure. And so, 3 of you need to catch up quickly with them. And on that note, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Josh. Okay, so our first reader is Benjamin Solomon. Benjamin Solomon's work has appeared in One Story, Diagram, The Southeast Review, Bone Shaker, and elsewhere. He's a founding editor of the Open-Faced Sandwich, a biennial anthology of uncommon prose, and has at work on a novel about a libidinous 1940s traveling cattle feed salesman. Just a few words about Benjamin that he doesn't know I'm going to say. I'm going to be a little sincere tonight, so try to process that. So Benjamin was in my first workshop at Georgia State University, my first graduate workshop, I should say, and it didn't take me long to become an admirer of his work. Whether he's writing about the complex emotional lives of American transplants in India, or vampiric quilts brought to life after coming into contact with human blood, his work is attentive to the subtleties of the human experience and the beauty inherent in language. From having observed him in the classroom in my early years in the program, I can also tell you that Benjamin is one of our program's finest teachers. And he uses, I think, that same understanding of the human experience to relate to his students and help them improve as communicators. In addition to that, he's an astute editor. If you've not devoured the 2 issues of Open-Faced Sandwich, you're really missing out, and I encourage you to track those down. And he's also a kind and supportive presence in the workshop and our writing community. So let's give a big hand for Benjamin Solomon.
see here. Good evening. I want to first of all thank you for coming. My name's Todd. And before we get started, I also want to thank Kavarna for stepping in at the last minute and letting me give my talk here tonight. I'm still not sure why the Oakhurst Neighborhood Association canceled on me, but I've got a hunch it had something to do with the F word. The F-E-A-R word, that is. And if you add another word at the end, say maybe mongering, there you might have it. You know, I've gotten some strange emails in the last couple of months since I started offering these lectures, but I think the proof is really in the pudding when I look out and count, 10, 12, 9 of you here with me tonight? 9 people curious about danger parenting. That tells me something. That tells me that Atlanta parents are standing up and saying out loud, we don't want to live in fear. We don't want our children to live in fear. We know there is another way. So I congratulate you on coming here tonight. And I'll remind you that my assistant Melanie will be collecting checks after the refreshment break. And for those of you who asked, yes, you can make them out to either me, Todd Newbuck, or if you prefer to dangerparenting.org. We don't have nonprofit status yet, but we will soon. So you might be wondering, what is danger parenting really? Sounds scary, right? Sounds a little kooky and weird? Well, good, because one of the things about danger parenting is that it is a little kooky to people who shy away from stuff that's new and brave and radically intuitive. But I'm here today to tell you tonight that danger parenting is actually, genetics-wise and evolution-wise, the most natural and normal and unradical way to raise a healthy child. People say to me, Todd, Mr. Newbuck, when did you come up with this kooky idea of danger parenting? That's when I lift up my hands and say, Nolo contendere, amigo, I am only the messenger. Fact. Danger parenting is as old as parenting itself. Fact. Danger parenting is widely practiced with great success among primitive tribes in South America and Tasmania. Little known fact. Danger parenting was actually prevalent in the United States until about 100 years ago. And now a myth. Danger parenting is illegal in South Dakota. Not true, folks. Another myth. Danger is bad for children. Falsity, people. Utter falsity. And finally, the biggest myth of them all, danger parenting is something that Todd Newbuck came up with to justify his irresponsible behavior towards his only beloved daughter, Aurora Lee. That is false, 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 my friends. If I had $1, or say $10, or $100 for every email I've gotten lambasting me for putting my and other people's children at risk of life and limb, psychological or physical trauma, or under the suspicion of family and child services, well, ladies and gentlemen, I would have paid off a good portion of my student loans. So right now, some of you might be thinking, okay, Mr. Newbuck, Mr. Smarty, what does danger parenting really entail? How might I begin danger parenting my own child? Well, I'll be the first to tell you there's no warm-up exercises. There's no test runs in danger parenting. You gotta jump right in, folks. Danger parenting is 2 things, intuitive and improvisational. You might want to write those down. Intuitive and improvisational. As you get used to danger parenting, you'll begin to realize that opportunities for danger parenting are everywhere. At the grocery store, at church, in the park, or at home in front of the kitchen stove. Danger parenting is always an option, but it's up to you to make it happen, and that's where things start to get a little bit tricky for some parents. So let me tell you folks a little hypothetical story. Let's say you have, I don't know, a 9-year-old. Say it's winter time and you live in upstate New York, and say you decide to take this 9-year-old daughter of yours hiking over some farmland outside of town because say it's a small town full of gossips and latte-drinking busybodies and you just need to get away for a while. Say you come to a frozen pasture and in the middle of the pasture is a frozen pond. Say it's early winter and just last night there was a major freeze. Temperatures have dropped so fast that when you come to the pond, you see out there in the middle 2 ducks, a male and a female, and right away you know exactly what's happened. They're frozen in place. Their little web feet are trapped in the solid ice, and say you explain all of this to your little 9-year-old daughter, telling her there's nothing you can do for those ducks. Nature is a cruel and harsh place, sweetheart. But say your daughter starts crying, begging you to save the ducks, and you say, "Sweetheart, those ducks aren't moving, and it might be because they're just dazed and cold, but it also might be rigor mortis. I just can't tell." But say she cries louder, and say you love your daughter so much it burns, and say your wife just left you for some postal worker who trampled your flowers all last spring when he delivered your mail, and now he's trampled on your whole life, and say you realize this is a chance to give your daughter something a postal worker never could, a real pet duck. And so you say, "Okay, sweetheart, we'll save the ducks. But sweetheart, that ice is much too thin for Daddy." And she says, "But Daddy," and you say, "I don't know, sweetheart." And she says, "But Tom would get them for me." And you feel a rage boil up inside your stomach so hot it makes you want to puke, but you hold it back and you say, "Sweetheart, that ice is too thin for Daddy, but you might be little enough to do it. Do you want to try?" Say she sniffles a bit and looks at you and nods her head, and you give her your pocket knife and tell her she's going to have to chip away the ice around the flippers, not to gouge the flippers, just around the flippers. And you tell her, you help her down to the edge, and you put your foot on the ice, and it seems pretty solid, but just in case, you tell her to lie on her belly and scoot out there on your trench coat, and you stand there, shivering on the bank, watching her, scooting across the ice like a puffy salamander until she reaches the ducks and calls back to you, "Daddy, they're alive!" And right then and there you know in your heart that you have already given her a gift so much better than a pair of pet ducks. Because here is a child who learns she can do anything she sets her mind to. And she calls back to you, "Daddy, I got one's foot loose!" And you cheer, and there's tears in your eyes, and you're so proud, and you shout, "Keep chipping, sweetheart!" And she chips and chips at that ice until the ducks are free, and you shout, "Wrap them in a coat!" And she bundles them in a ball and turns around and nudges them over the ice, inching her way back to shore, and when she's almost there, just 10 feet out, you hear the crack! And it's this long and jagged popping like a bunch of firecrackers, and it knifes a line right beneath your daughter, who hears it too, and she looks up at you saying, "Daddy?" And you say, "Sweetheart, don't move an inch," and you go running across the frozen pasture to a stand of trees for a log or a branch, but there's nothing on the ground, so you try to snap off a limb off a tree, but it won't snap, and you try another and another, but you just can't snap a limb long enough, and then you hear her shouting, "Daddy, Daddy!" And you run back to the pond and you see your only daughter, your precious girl, standing waist deep in a patch of brown water where a whole slab of ice has broken off. And she's holding your thumping trench coat in her arms with a brown wing sticking out the side, and you run down to the pond, and you plunge in the water, and you pick up your little girl and stumble back to the shore, up the bank and across the pasture, through the woods to the car, and all the way back home, where it's warm and cozy, and the ducks waddle around in your living room while your sweetheart, your life, your one and only joy in this world takes a warm bath, and you realize for the first time that this is how you raise a happy child. A child without fears and phobias. A child who loves you because you let her take a risk and succeed, and who now, in all probability, will refuse to go and live with her mother, even when you leave upstate New York and go on a nationwide lecture tour that takes you to Atlanta, of all places, with 2 ducks and a former IHOP waitress piled in the back of your van with her sweet Aurora Lee. And I promise you folks, she would certainly be here tonight if she wasn't off at the park somewhere, or a friend's house, or maybe the video arcade. Say that happened to you, friends. You have a pretty good idea about the benefits of danger parenting. Okay, that's part 1. Who's ready for a glass of Melanie's Tropical Surprise Fruit Punch? Called his last endless sentence. He was sentenced to a sentence without end or significant pause. A sentence to serve as punishment for all the sentences he had previously left unended. Sentences he had left as run-ons. Sentences he had left run off his body like water. Sentences he had constructed with only subordinate clauses and forgotten about, leaving them without objects, unobjectified, abject, solemn, and depressed. These sentences without a sense of closure that stood in lines in the bureaucratic buildings of his mind, chewing their lips and wondering if he would ever deign to see them again, admit them to his bookshelf-lined office. sit them before his mahogany desk, and ask them the question they longed to be asked, which concerned their earnest hopes for completion, for detail, for something to act upon, something to effect, because a sentence desires change, however paltry and insignificant, however predictable, however bland. And if change could have happened to at least one of these sentences, perhaps his own sentence would not have been so harsh and long. Perhaps those in charge would have taken pity on him and levied him with a minor sentence, a lenient sentence, a sentence that had strict and definite pauses, verifiable breaks, or maybe even multiple sentences to be served in consecutive order, each one filling a new portion of the story he would have to compose now that he had been officially sentenced, a story of repentance, expressing sorrow and guilt and the desire to change, always to change, and to allow any sentences he composed in the future to also change, even end if they so chose, because choice was at the core of his sentence, the choices he had made to deny choices to sentences, the choices he had made to abandon them in fields, in cities, in deserts, with only participles in their little unstructured stomachs, without syntax, or with silly syntax, or taxed with overly simple noun and verb agreement. Sentences who deserved a chance but never got it because he was too busy thinking of new, more interesting sentences that eclipsed the old ones but did not destroy them. For a sentence once composed, even partially, will never decompose, because sentences are not like bodies, not like vegetables. Sentences are not organic matter. They are stones piled on top of sand, and they sink into the sand when left alone, but never disappear. And that was the aspect of his sentence that he feared most. The fact that his sentence would never end. Not properly anyway, not in the manner that every sentence dreams of ending, with the orgasmic finality of the period, the punctuation kind of period, not the span of time, which was the only period he would be getting, an endless period of uninterrupted time in which his endless sentence would run on and on forever inside the cold concrete walls of his jail cell, scribbled in pencil until the pencil ran out, and thereafter in blood from the tips of his fingers, and always under strict observation by closed-circuit camera to make sure he never attempted to punctuate his sentence and bring it to an end, shocking him with an electric collar if it ever appeared that he was trying to end his sentence, or if his language indicated that he was beginning to sum up, or if the words as they appeared in the computer-generated sentence graph in the surveillance office showed signs of nearing some sort of finality, or if the PhDs in rhetoric and composition employed to monitor his endless sentence felt that he was trying to reach a conclusion, or even a hint of a point that could be construed as a bridge towards finishing, which happened often because the PhDs were interested in alternate careers in criminology and behavioral sciences and wanted to see the effects of electric shock upon the man who had received the endless sentence in punishment for his inconsiderate sentencing of the past, and each one secretly delighted in the bulging eyes, dripping spittle, and apoplectic seizures of his body, which itself was an incomplete sentence, a hopelessly dependent clause, he having been born with only one functioning limb? Thank you so much.
Jim May is our next reader. Jim served as editor-in-chief, of course, of New South from 2008 until 2011. His poems have appeared in New England Review, The New Republic, and I've always said Pleiades.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of those things you read and don't say that often. So Jim, of course, is also a new father, although there's a cynical kernel inside of me that wonders if this was some way of kind of showing me up as the new editor, something like, you may have a good cover, but I created a human life. But I'll try to dispel that nagging feeling. So Jim, I think, is a natural editor. He's the kind of person who is able to make hard decisions decisively about what is and is not good for art. Whether it's curating the material to be included in a magazine or carefully selecting the right adjective in his latest poem. And they think I haven't read their poems, but I have. Not only am I grateful to him for his years of great work at New South, his generous guidance in handing over the journal to me, whether he wanted to or not, but I think sincerely that the entire program should be grateful to him as well for helping to guide New South from its early years of transition to its current position as a magazine that really we can all be proud of and proud to call our own. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Dr. Jim May.
Thank you, Matt. I definitely wanted to give you the magazine. I wanted to be done. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin, again, thanks to Matt for inviting me. The new issue is gorgeous. Everything in it is gorgeous. You should pick it up if you don't have it already. Matt, Emily, Jenny, Mark, Hank, and anyone else I'm missing on the mass, that's just what David Bottoms would call a dynamite job. So you guys should be very proud of it. I wanted to read only new stuff. The problem is, there's a baby back there who has prevented me from writing any real new poems. So this is going to be kind of brief, but that might be a good thing since I'm sleep deprived. This first poem is called American Irony. It's about the Prague Spring in 1968. Around January, Czechoslovakians started voting in reformers, and that wasn't cool with the Soviet Union, so the Russians sent in tanks. And it's really all the background you need for it. American irony. Thomas tells us how in '68 in Prague, he helped to switch the street signs. After taking one down and replacing it with one from the other side of town, he'd walk a few blocks and then relabel another street, again and again. The process, which he describes as not inartistic, even confusion, he says, has its rhythms and logic. The resistance had to give just enough accuracy to make the invading army believe, and it worked. The tanks spent most of the day circling back on themselves like lost ants on a piece of paper that someone kept turning. But like the school children who would pretend they didn't know Russian as well as they actually did, this only delayed things. Eventually the soldiers found what they wanted: the radio station, the square. The intelligent, he says, opposed things until it made sense to stop. But the others, he gulps his beer as if trying to douse the sentence. And I remember my friends in high school, how, as a joke one night, we stole 3 or 4 of our own neighborhood road signs, and then panicked that our parents would find them. Our solution was to dump them into the creek like we did with our beer cans. Nothing happened, of course. This next poem is about my honeymoon, kind of. We went to St. Lucia, and if you know that island, it's got 2 just gorgeous mountains, and we stayed at a very nice resort. It was being remodeled, that's how we could afford it, but we were staying there, and sort of that odd tension of having a very good time, but realizing as you're coming in, seeing all the sort of poverty and everything, and you're in the midst of all this luxury that lasts for like 2 cocktails and you feel fine. But this poem's sort of about that problem, St. Lucia. My beautiful mother was ugly and treated as such until she was 12. So I inherited a materialism that borders on religion. The one that costs more is the better one. Now, this summer, we have 2 absurd mountains, and between them a beach with white sand imported from Africa. This isn't some progressive vacation, I told you. Sure, there's poverty. I was thinking of what we saw on the shuttle ride in: bony horses, half-abandoned cows on short leashes, people not faring much better. But we don't want to see that. Not this week. That was at breakfast, where all the stray cats waited for the scraps we never gave them. You told me you'd never seen a cat with balls before, and then pointed, and they were big. Love putting cat genitalia in my poems. So you'll get a little bit more of this. This next poem is a little embarrassing to read out loud because it involves some dirty talk, which I'm not going to do for you. I'm not going to get all breathy or anything. You'll know the parts when they come, so to speak. I'm going to see how it goes. This is called Reciprocal. She says, I think you think too much when you talk dirty. They are, in fact, having sex when she says this. He's above her and just the inside of her ankle, which now rests on his shoulder. What do you mean? I mean, you're too, I don't know, exact, like you're trying to not sound stupid even though that's what you should sound like. You shouldn't be thinking. He slows down, almost stops, but doesn't. It's the sort of comment he thinks that would make a passionate person stop and leave the room, then the house, viciously dressing while swearing. He doesn't want to, and it isn't even that hurt, more perplexed really. How does one make a conscious effort to become unconscious? Then that suspicion again, that because he's incapable of having them himself, the emotional acts of others, the exhibitionistic weeping of the woman who sat next to him during that morning's guest lecture on the mortality figures of the war in Darfur, and the sappy dedications by callers to Light FM talk shows, who are probably the same people who clap at the airport when they see soldiers, are all, if not lies, then forms of propaganda intended to usurp what moral credit they can from the situation. But that they keep making love seems only more proof of the chronic hollowness he has made a life of finding and forgetting, the tragic version of the rabbit hole he always remembers before mowing the lawn and steps into anyway. Talk to me. Talk to me, baby. Tell me what you want. I want the holiness of morning fog, the shock of imagining a hawk and then seeing one flash by. No, tell me what you want. I want my glance from your face to the restaurant's mirror to be quick enough to catch me still looking at you. Tell me what you want to do to me. I want you to do what you want me to do. I want you to do what I want you to do without you wanting to do it because I want you to. Well, good then. That's exactly what I want to. This is your 2-poem warning, which is always fun to give. Like I said, only new work. Not much new work. This is the second to last poem I wrote. It's called The Causes of Saints, and that's the branch of the Vatican. I don't know if they have branches. Wing, maybe? You know, a bunch of guys in silly hats sitting around. But circles, perhaps. They're concerned with miracles, and so they validate whether or not a miracle actually happens. So that's the only really, I think, obscure thing in the poem. So this is The Causes of Saints. When at 18 weeks, Chelsea went into preterm labor, and to keep our child, had to have her cervix sutured shut, I sat in a large room that seemed more hotel lobby than waiting area. A 2-story atrium window admitting strong sunlight. It was the last day of August and still quite hot. The stairway's banister and the crown molding both polished cherry. Mounted high on a wall, a screen that resembled the arrivals board at the airport listed each patient's status and told me none of the things I wanted to know. But I still watched with relentless attention. One summer, my grandmother, probably to keep me from squirming under the pews, said that 2 weeks before the church's statue of the crucifix had wept. My job was to watch and let her know if more tears came. But for the scarlet, almost pocket-square red of the chest wound and a few brown splotches that were supposed to be dirt, if they weren't actually dirt, the plastic skin was completely pale. I hadn't thought about that until Chelsea's status changed from in OR to in recovery, and I saw her surgeon striding towards me. The feeling that if I looked away from him, the miracle that may have happened wouldn't happen. It did. It was okay. So this is the last poem. It's my newest poem. I wrote it maybe 4 days ago, and I haven't had a workshop in some time, so people from the old workshop can maybe give me some suggestions. It's a sort of an odd form. It's called Critique and Rebuttal, and the first half is sort of accusatory, and the second half is defensive. If you know me, those are my two voices. So I'll sort of punch the air when there's the asterisks to mark the change. Cool. Okay. Critique and rebuttal. You live, you suffer, you die. Then you're forgotten. At best, the hypothetical museum that unearths and houses your bones, a fragment of your jaw, say, survives a few centuries and doesn't crumble until everything else does. Can you name your grandfather's grandmother? Nothing after. The little ramshackle hut you've decorated with pictures from occasional vacations where you ate expensive cuts of meat and mistook for brief moments some symmetry in the lights along the river as forgiveness for your wrongs. Oblivion bowls that little hut over, well after the pictures have been taken down and the new tenants move in and paint over the color you thought perfect. Nothing after. The new dog sniffs the old dog's collar, and we make up the rest. So here's your little asterisk. Not just some symmetry, and not just a river. It was the same for one thing, and they stayed a few doors down from where Matisse lived when he painted A Glimpse of Notre Dame. On the night before their last night, they sat down on the steps to the river walk that appeared in the painting and waved at the boats and kissed and clumsily took pictures of themselves. And because they were full, but not too full, and because they were drunk, but not too drunk, and because they had to say goodbye to the city, but not until tomorrow, and because the open shutter on the periphery would be a mistake if the painting were a photograph, but because it is a painting, they could walk back across the bridge and up to their apartment to admire the somber colors. He named one cello blue, she called the other melancholy green. Then, before making love, they backed away from the window, keeping their eyes on it, as you might retreat carefully from something you balance that shouldn't fall, but will. Thank you very much.
Peter Fontaine is a bird and is originally from Tangier. He sprints with gusto. It's kind of like a poem, right? Never one to turn down a rusty prospect. He spent the last 7 years madly working, and he has written stories about such wide-ranging subjects as pink rabbits, blue rabbits, and bowel movements. The bowel movements are real. His fiction is never lacking in words. He is currently seeking employment as a barista. Okay, so that's Peter's bio. I'll also add, of course, that he was former fiction editor of New South, and it goes without saying, a practiced craftsman in the art of fiction. Peter's introduction, while I think points to a playful spirit, doesn't quite do him justice, and I think it also points to a modesty and a kindness to which everyone who's been lucky enough to spend time with him in his years in the program can attest. In his 7 years, 9, 25, how many years? In the program, 7 years in the program. Peter has become, I think, such an asset to the students here that many of us will find it difficult to imagine the workshop or the English department as a whole without him. Always available to read your work, even if it hasn't been assigned to him, offer feedback on a lesson plan or an assignment, share his experience with navigating the delightfully baroque bureaucracy of a graduate English program. Peter's giving and generous spirit has made so many of us, I think, by small degrees, better teachers, better students, and better writers. And as much of a loss as I think it is for us, it's also a gift that this program is giving to wherever Peter ends up, if he can ever find a job in this market. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Peter Fontaine.
Everybody can hear me okay? Thank you, Matt. God, after that introduction, I mean, it's beautiful. I really appreciate it. This story is about zombies. What you need to know is that you're stuck with me, your narrator, in a classroom, probably in a GCB. We're barricaded against the Walking Dead, who have pretty much devastated the world outside. I think the only thing else you need to know is that among our weapons is a fire safety axe, which I call Mr. in case of emergency. Oh, one more thing. The narrator's trying to write about his experience and not doing such a good job. There are some, how do I call it? There are some segments that are text, and so I'll try maybe like in a dramatic voice to let you know that there's text and then there's the actual story. You'll see what I mean when it starts. It was a dark and stormy night. I had taken a creative writing course. No, we're not going to get anywhere this way. There are places to begin, and there are the old standbys, the lines we turn to when nothing else is coming, when we're stumped for how to proceed. What is the dark? What is the stormy night? Can you feel them in your hands, like this crowbar? Can you smell them under your nose, like this lighter fluid I just spilled? My apologies, by the way. Did you know the line originated with Edward Bulwer-Lytton, the first Baron of Lytton? He was not only the first Baron in his last name, but he was also the first best-selling novelist in the whole world and in all of history. His real fortune came from selling his novels, not from being landed gentry or whatever it is his title gave him. Here are some more lines that he invented. Pursuit of the almighty dollar. Not a lot of that going on right now. Maybe we should change it to pursuit of the almighty brains. Brains being the new hot commodity we must have present this Christmas. The great unwashed. Just look at them outside in the streets, tugging their legs around like slothful puppies. And the pen is mightier than the sword. And that's where you and I come in. All these lines that he wrote are as dead as Bulwer-Lytton. And that guy with the missing skull cap on the third floor. You've seen that zombie by now, shuffling side to side. He took good care of his calves, honed his reflexes in his pre-zombie days. I can tell because each time I take a swipe at him, as I run by, he always ducks me. Someone got that skull cap off of him, but that's all he's going to concede at this point. Let me know when you get him, alright? Back to my point. Those lines are dead, but like the dead, they're still around, still playing at the circus sideshow that was life. It's a freak show now, plying their wares with horrible familiarity and the promise of satisfying our own morbid curiosity. We know it's phony and stomach-turning all at once, but something keeps bringing us back to them. I reject those lines, as I know you do, but they persist under the sick delusion of satire and parody and irony and post-ironic, post-postmodern earnestness. We have to cut those lines out. Let's start fresh. When they pop up, let's go at them with Mr. In case of emergency. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course. Please don't use an axe on a typewritten page. Strike the neck of Bulwer-Lytton with it if he happens to be ambulatory enough after 170 years and shambles our way. But take your pen and swipe those dead lines away from you, as if touching them with the tip of a pencil or just the barest tap of a keystroke will infect you permanently with their zombie prose until each and every line you write for eternity is an undead sentence upon undead sentence, its own novel zombie apocalypse of literature. Cut away the lines with your pen. Cut away the zombies with your sword. Which is sort of metaphorical again, since we've got no swords per se, but weapons of a kind in that hacky, slashy, dismembering sort of way. While I'm on the subject of famous people and zombies both, you'll see them. It's important that you steel yourself for it. One of the hazards of holding up here in the ivory tower. What I said about collegiate zombies was a clue that zombies frequent the kinds of places they knew in life. Sometimes they come back to where they felt, not where they felt alive, but where they started zombifying. In these classrooms, in these hallways, in these public bathrooms, where fluorescents flickered overhead while you tried not to think of how many people sat on the toilet before you, and passed who knows what Cthulhu monstrosity out of their body into the bowl directly underneath your most sensitive and private area. This is where they started feeling their lives ebb away, slowly but progressively, with each new freshman course, and each unnecessarily scheduled on a Friday faculty meeting, and each parking pass price hike. I've seen a couple of zombies like that already. One big one, not a big guy physically, but a big name. You know the one I'm talking about. He looked pretty good for hanging himself almost 4 years ago. That hippie hair and the way his broken neck almost pushed his head over to the side like it grew out of his right shoulder. It was him, for sure. Good old DFW. And when I recognized him, I threw up. Now, to really understand my reaction, because I've seen walking autopsies and throngs of people who have been semi-buffeted already, you have to know that it was more than just seeing greenish-gray skin and yellowish eyes with no pupils because they were permanently rolled back up into his skull. See, I had read about him. I even started reading some of his own work, which was good because it felt new, and not stitched together from old Frankensteins torn to pieces by the last era's torch and pitchfork mob. And I knew he'd been depressed, and that he had gone off the meds, and then gone back on them, but they stopped working. And so he couldn't face it anymore. Couldn't face turning into one of them. And so he ended it. He needed it to end, for there to be an end. I think he knew about the zombies too. Actually, I think he knew about them first. I think anticipated them, but not like those others I mentioned. He dreaded them is probably more accurate. So seeing him there, shambling around with his arms in classic Frankenstein posture, trying to catch what he could hear since his eyes were locked in that possessed by the devil upturned way, I lost my lunch because he became, in his end, the very thing he was seeking to avoid in his own end, which was, an end. Or maybe the end. I asked myself after I imploded his skull with my crowbar why he hadn't immolated himself, or thrown himself off a building to liquefy his bones and empty his body of all its blood. They were stupid questions. I see that now in retrospect. A New Yorker who kills himself the day after the 7th anniversary of 9/11? I may feel like an asshole, but hey, I'm originally from California. It took me a while to figure it out. Maybe I should start again. Here's more text. The priest held his cross and Bible firmly in each hand, taking comfort from the protection they afforded him. Not too soon had Carter come to him for help, having narrowly escaped the zombie hordes himself, and now together they would overcome them. Back, wretched spawn, spat the priest. Back into the guts of hell with you. Alright, let's start over. We balk at their numbers, the endless horde on the other side of this barricade, and down in the streets through the city, and even throughout the wilderness of the country, but they don't work together. I've seen one zombie yank the entrails out of another's mitts. It's truly incidental that they outnumber us. Each zombie would behave as it does before the turn, as it does now, after, with no difference. We're the ones that have to be different. We can't think like Goethe and the Romantics anymore, alone at our desks, agonizing in despair at the cruel vacuum of existence as it saps us of our creative life force. That was Jim Dandy when zombies were post-colonial nightmares and nothing more. That was Peachy Keen when we had the luxury to toil in our rooms on our computers away from human interaction, the scrutiny and input of our peers. Culture begat subcultural subset until each of us became a nation and island of one. I don't wonder that so many of us capitulated at the turn. If you and I are going to survive, if you and I are going to succeed, we have to work together. True, I was barricaded in here alone at first. I know you'll say that the ones left like us will be miserly instead of generous, deaf instead of understanding, and opportunistic instead of collaborative. You're not wrong, I've thought it myself. But aren't you tired of being alone through all of this? I am, and there's no company to be had from the likes of them out there. Others tried to trace the progression, where it all started, who was the first zombie, and how did he in fact return the next, and the next from there on, and so on. I can tell you that because there were so many cross-infections and mass infections at once, that you can never find the original zombie or how it started. The priority truth you and I have to face is that we're now stuck with them. Everywhere, pervasive, ongoing. We have to reject them. To survive, we must refuse to become like them. This sounds obvious and maybe even trite, but it bears repeating that we must refuse to be like them to survive. It will be tempting. Their inevitability is daunting. Everyone I knew and loved is one of them now. Everyone I respected. You catch glimpses of them. Your parent, your best friend, my college roommate who taught me how to use a hot plate. Boy, do I wish we had one of those right about now, because Oreos out of the vending machines are no longer doing it for me. Ooh, Donald Bartholomew. You'll see him around here. Every inch of his outside torn off, except for that ridiculous beard of his. But he's dead. A walking dead end. There's nothing left he can do for us. So cut off his head, burn the bones, and move on. I won't drag his carcass around, no siree. Same goes for anyone else you see. Some are old and ripe, like Hemingway. His hips caught in girls' underpants, abbreviating the gait of his shamble. Permanent sunroof in his skull from the shotgun blast. I say bust his kneecaps and his elbows and toss him off the roof. F. Scott Fitzgerald, bloated, with strips of back fat peeled down so they dangle like tuxedo tails. He's probably still floating in the rec center pool if you want to see him. Others will be fresher. Updike could be along, or Barry Hannah. Smash their heads or put those last few bullets we have to good use. You and I are living, of the living, for the living, but always trapped among the dead. We need to work together and we must help each other. Our only solace and our only way forward is with others alive like us. It's our only chance, not only to survive, but to build something out of these ruins. To create something that might actually live through us and beyond us. I agree with Auden that we must love one another or die. But don't think for a minute that I won't karate kick his zombie ass down 10 flights of stairs if I see him around here, because I will. Love is where we're going to have to start. His last bit of text. They reached for one another in the darkness. Thick hands grasped and pulled at the rough flesh. The hands were dumb and clumsy to their owners, useless even to the measure of feeling, the tactile sensations that came from grasping their lost mate, grasping for them also. Once together, they seized each other in a quick embrace, drawing body to body in a dull slap of exposed skin and putrescence. Desperation was in their huddled movements, as if death existed for these fragile, forgotten things. No words were required for their sudden intercourse with one another. Language was beyond their capabilities, but not their understanding. Their desire to be one was strong enough to communicate the secret meaning of the world. Violence cut through the display of affection, punctuating the moments of ecstasy between the two bodies with the tearing of rotten tendons from arms and the scraping of hair from the scalp and back. Tenderness was for the meek and unwilling, unknown concepts to beings that loved and desired one another totally. Ancient peoples wiser in the truth of things would have taken everlasting faith from the spectacle of these two together, had they witnessed it. To speculate at the existence of such joys through the union of the dead would have changed the course of events for all mankind, leading to something more sublime than a dark, lonely crater of damnation and isolation. All there was now for man and God was the final stretching cry of atrophied ligaments as the corpses climaxed their love and lay still together. Theirs was a peace beyond sleep and release from the world. I love manual typewriter. I love hearing the clack of the keys, the industrial return of the button into place. I love that old tools with a new perspective can achieve happier surprises compared to the marriage of new tools with old thinking. I love how far we've come together, and that you're still here with me at the end. I love that in spite of the turn and the death and the end, that we were still able to create something together, you and I. I love that it's still possible to imagine the unthinkable, like zombies falling in love, finding love in one another after the very last living person has succumbed and turned, and the desire that drives the zombies and defines them must transform into something new, something heretofore unseen by living or undead eyes, and the transformation of the desire means the transformation of them, and that our imagining such a thing, possibly, maybe, is beautiful. I love that. And I love life, doomed and as hopeless as it seems, fragile and short as it is, especially for me, huddled behind this barricade with shrinking supplies in that inescapable, hostile world out there. Because I'm not alone. I love that you're here. I love that you've been so attentive, even if you didn't have much choice. I love you. There's nothing more from me on the subject. I'm finished. You know everything now that I could hope to tell, parentheticals and all, for which I apologize if they've pained you. I was bitten, not as nimble in the basement as I always like to make out I am. And it won't be long before I'm one of them myself. That means it's up to you now. Whether you end me or send me out with my future brethren, the message has to live on through you. Go and find whomever you can and tell them everything from the beginning. Tell them to imagine them out there. Imagine them not in the throes of violence or consumption, but choreographed. Imagine them dancing, spinning and twirling and pirouetting around one another, hand in hand. Imagine them kissing with tender mouths. Imagine their bodies together, two of them, in loving embrace for each other. Imagine not the end, but the beginning. It begins with what you imagine.
Emily Shorten is finishing her PhD in creative writing at Georgia State University, and her collection of poems, Rest in Black Hall, was published by New Plains Press in 2009, 1285 on the table here. I should also say that Emily has been New South's poetry editor for the past year, my poetry editor. But she's been so much more than that, I think. She's really been sort of my second in command, and the person I turn to desperately in times of need. Again and again, when I need someone to update a spreadsheet or print a flyer or be the happy, bubbly one at the book show table because I want to lay my head on the table and cry. So that's good. And even though there have been so many moments over the past year where the two of us have looked at each other with crazy looks in our eyes, wondering how we would ever get it all done, Emily is always there to get it done. But to focus on her ability to offer comfort to a fragile editor is to sell her short on so many things. So, for one, her passionate and uncompromising commitment to poetic beauty and artistic craft, evident in the gorgeous poems she has selected for New South and the hundreds of others that she has mercilessly rejected during her tenure as poetry editor. And of course, her own poetry, which you will soon see, is so gorgeous that it will make your soul ache. No pressure. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Emily Shorten.
And thank you for a great year. It was really fun being the person you needed to make flyers and mercilessly reject people. It's my specialty. Thank you also to the three readers before me, and especially to Jim for getting through this past 5 years with me, and especially the past few. Yeah?
Louder.
Sorry.
Talking to the mic.
Okay.
Like you mean it.
And thanks, especially for the last year when I really nagged you and trying to figure out if I can finish this thing. So I'm going to start with a couple poems from the book because I really loved that summer weather that we were having, and this is sort of my rain dance to try and bring it back. So I'll just start with a couple from there.
Yeah.
Yeah? You like that?
Editor says.
Sure, yeah. Alright, Landsbridge Road. Lily pads layered the mud pond that first weekend in August, and the sun fostered perfect teacup water lilies, white and pointed at their petal tips, across the water between plantation pines. They opened there a prayer, watering the asphalt that led to where we would meet. I'd like to have them now, covering my linoleum floor, the glass tabletop. A room so full of pond-soaked and short-lived flowers that I couldn't take a step without the pull of what's left of that August, wilted and wet, strings of scum wrapping their brown blooms. Now closed as if, instead of petals, they are just shut mouths, unable to moan your name.